Do you want to build a snow cake and put pine cones and berries on? If you do, then watch this video and I will show you how to make it. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for watching the last Christmas cake of 2019. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So what I have already done is filled and stacked a 6-inch and an 8-inch layer and gently crumb coated these sides. Now I'm not putting on buttercream on the sides of the cake just because we're going to be using chocolate bark for the sides, so I didn't want it to be overly sweet. But I did put a smooth layer of brown buttercream, a very light brown, and then I took a fork, put it into the middle of the cake, gently spun it around, and created these little rings. Now, after you are done creating the ring part, sometimes that buttercream can kind of push out onto the sides. If that happens, just take your spatula and kind of just spread it flatly down, because we don't want to leave any overhang on the top, because when we go to put the bark, it'll look bowed out versus completely flat. So once you are done with the 8-inch cake, go ahead and do the same process with your 6-inch. And this time I used my turntable, so it was a little bit easier to create the rings on this because I just literally turned the table, held the fork still, and it did all the work for me. Once you have this part done, go ahead and place these into the fridge while we work on our pine cones. Now I'm going to show you two different ways to make these pine cones. One way is just a little bit easier. So what you want to do is use modeling chocolate or brown fondant, and if you don't have a wooden skewer, you can just completely do it like this, and you just want to gently kind of roll your pine cone from side to side and snipping in between, going from bottom to top. Now you want to be very careful and kind of pull your little cut areas back a little bit just to give it a little bit more of that pine cone look, and kind of flatten them if you can. But be careful, because you don't have a wooden skewer in here, not to kind of squish the shape that you're giving it back down. Now this is my favorite way to do this, is to kind of roll your fondant into that teardrop shape, put it onto a wooden dowel, and then begin cutting it. It's just a lot easier when you can have that the stick to kind of turn and roll as you're cutting, so you don't have to mess up the pine cone with your fingers. Now let these harden up for a bit, and then we'll place them on the cake later. Now what I did for my chocolate bark was I actually took some parchment paper, rolled it up into my hands, kind of squished it and crinkled it up and created a lot of texture in it, and then flattened them up and put them onto a cookie tray. So what we're doing this for is because when we pour our melted chocolate onto these parchment papers, it's going to have a flat top, which is the part that we're actually going to adhere to the cake, but then the part that we're crumbling up, once we peel the parchment paper off of the chocolate, it will leave a nice, beautiful tree bark like texture. So once you are done with the crumbling of this and melting the chocolate, make sure there's no lumps or clumps in it, put it onto your parchment paper, smooth it out kind of thin, not too thin, you don't want it to break very easily, but thin enough, and kind of just make sure that you get that chocolate all the way out to the edges of the parchment paper. And once you have that done, and this is a messy task, so just be a little bit patient, it'll be fine, it'll be so worth it in the end, then you want to go ahead and either let this dry at room temperature, or you can let it sit up in the fridge, which is what I did because I was kind of in a hurry making this cake. So once you are done with the chocolate part, we're going to begin decorating our cake. So the first thing I actually need you to get is some Hershey's cocoa powder. We're going to dry dust with a super soft brush into the little crevices where we created those rings. So of course we're going to start with the bottom tier. You could do either one, it doesn't matter. I just was kind of doing it in sections, and I was going to be placing my 6-inch on top of this. So actually I didn't even need to do the middle of the cake with this dry dusting right here with the cocoa powder, just because I'm going to be putting my smaller cake on top anyway, and you won't really be able to see it. However, I did have a little bit of a dilemma. When I went to put my dowels into the cake, I had thought I wanted to center the 6-inch cake onto it, and then I decided that I kind of liked the look of it kind of pushed over to the side. So that's why you're about to see 6 dowels in the middle of my cake. But it's totally fine. Also, if you don't want to use the Hershey's cocoa powder for this, you can just use some food grade alcohol and a little bit of brown color dye and mix it and just kind of go in between each of these lines. You can do that as well. So once you have your cake stacked and you have the color dusted all over to the little the little rings of the cake, it is time for us to go ahead and add the bark. So for the bark, I have now pulled it out of the fridge, and it's nice and set up. You just kind of want to be very careful peeling off the parchment paper, because the idea is we want this to look like bark. Bark is long stripes, not really horizontal. So we want to be very careful pulling this off. Now, of course, this piece broke a little bit more on me because I made it too thin. It's totally fine because we're going to use those breaking pieces to kind of fix the areas of the cake where we're kind of missing some bark just because of the different shapes and everything. So it's completely fine. Now this piece turned out to be pretty nice and thick, and I just kind of want to break it vertically. We want really long stripes, so that way when we go to place them on the cake, it kind of looks more realistic. So just continue to remove the chocolate until you have it all broken down and ready to go, and then we will begin to assemble the bark onto our cake. So for this, you will need to get a piping bag full of either melted chocolate or buttercream. I had extra buttercream, so that's what I am going to use today. So once you have your chocolate or your piping bag ready to go, we're going to go ahead and adhere the little pieces of bark to the cake. Now, I always recommend doing the horizontal long pieces first, and then going in with your broken pieces to kind of do patchwork and figure out where you're missing certain shapes and where you think it needs to be a little bit thicker, or if you want it to be a little bit taller or anything like that. So once you have your cake completely done, the bark is going all the way around the top and the bottom layers, then you want to go ahead and place this into the fridge to set up, because we don't want any of the bark kind of moving around or falling around or melting on us while we're decorating the rest of the cake. The other thing that I recommend is to not really hold each piece in your hands for a long time, because your hands are hot and you can kind of start to melt that chocolate and take away some of the texture we created with the parchment paper. So now it is time for the fun part. So what I actually decided to do was to take my little pine cones and place them just kind of all over, wherever I felt they looked the best on the cake. I wanted to do kind of a group of them on the very top tier, and then of course some of them on my cake board, and the rest on the middle layer. I am just gluing these on with a little bit of buttercream, and they're pretty nice and set up. They've been drying for a couple hours now. So what you didn't see in the video that I also decided to do was I created some little red berries, and I just thought that this gave it a nice pop of color, good contrast for this cake. It is winter themed. They have winter berries, and I used a little bit of black in with my red fondant, and it created a nice deep shade of red. And then I literally just rolled them up into little balls and placed them and glued them also with some buttercream. Now once I was done gluing my berries, I did decide that I needed a little bit more green on this cake. So I took a star tip and I dyed a super dark green shade of buttercream, and I kind of just did a little crisscross thing and brought it around to kind of look like a piece of garland. And I did just a little bit more wherever I thought it could use a little touch of green, and of course I finished it off with snow, because it's not winter without a little bit of snow. So for the snow, I actually just took my powdered sugar and I kind of thrusted it up against the sides just to make sure that I had some on the sides, and of course the top as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a really fun cake to make. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below, and make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching my mom's video. Bye. Merry Christmas.